what would you define Hybr's company culture as now?
You need to genuinely give a shit around what you're doing and why you're there.
Forbes 30 Under 30 Hannah Chappatte is the founder and CEO of the award-winning student accommodation platform Hybr. On a mission to transform the student rental market, Hannah founded Hybr at just 21 years old.
So how does Hybr help students with the affordability issue?
Every time I pitched, they would tell me why that was the worst idea that they had ever heard. I might have a little bit of a cry, and then I'd kind of write up my rebuttal, and then I'd redo my pitch, and I'd go again and again and again. And that was really important for momentum for me as well, because it's really scary going out and cold calling.
How does it feel to be a founder?
I think just the best metaphor that, again, everyone talks about is you're building a plane whilst flying the plane. So we raised 3.3 million.
Whoa, it's a lot of money.
Today's episode is brought to you by Profile, a PR agency that turns entrepreneurs and CEOs into industry leaders through media coverage, LinkedIn, and video.
LinkedIn, media, and speaking opportunities are often an afterthought, especially for CEOs. They just don't have the time. That's where Profile step in. They take care of everything. They're an end-to-end service, so you can hand over the profile building to them and worry about driving the growth of your business.
So if you've got a story to tell and you want to build a profile as an entrepreneur or industry leader, you can find out more by going to www.welcometoprofile.com.
There's so much to talk about. You have so many things. We think the best way to start today is to dive into the story first, because your story is kind of unique. Not only did you start a business when you were 19, straight out of university, in 2019, were you 19?
I was 21.
You were 21. You started a business when you were 21, in 2019, straight out of university after studying liberal arts, and have gone on to found one of the largest student renting accommodation platforms in the UK. You've just closed some massive investment rounds. You've got a great team here in Holborn in London, and that's all very complicated to build. But how did it begin? If you could take us back to when you first created Hybr.
Of course. Firstly, thank you very much for having me.
No, it's great. It's great.
Coming to the office, even better. So I was a student at University of Bristol, so I studied liberal arts, which was very new in its infancy of the course. So I majored in English, I did history, languages, philosophy, ethics. And in my final year, I thought anyone smart goes into kind of banking, law, consulting, medicine. And I really didn't actually know about any other industries. So I threw myself into consultancy grad schemes and applied to literally every grad scheme I could possibly find. And I hated the process, felt awful about myself, felt more insecure than ever, especially all those online tests, and I'm very dyslexic. And I did a kind of assessment centre with PwC, a day in the life. And it was during that assessment centre that I just thought, this is really not for me. And at the same time, my housemate and I had spent most of our final year in the evenings discussing the student rental market and just how there were 3 million students that study in the UK every year, and where was that brand that really resonated with the first-time renter? There's a marketplace solution for anything if you want to compare insurance products, flights, clothes. But when it came to the 3 million students, so who was catering for them? So, when I thought about that idea, I was energized and excited. And when I thought about the kind of consultancy grad schemes, I felt really nervous about my future. So it was a bit of a no-brainer for me. As soon as I that end of graduated, had a kind of a summer of just relaxing, and then threw myself into it.
Okay, and when we talk about what the students were using prior to Hybr, what did that look like? What does that look like if a student doesn't use Hybr to rent student accommodation?
So back in 2019, so as soon as I got back from summer, I went back to Bristol, and I would just stand outside libraries with donuts, and I would just speak to as many students as possible. And what we found out,
effective.
Yeah, so it was a good way to get students to speak to you, free food. Right. And the same kind of three answers kept coming up, which is students will walk up and down the high street of the city that they're in to speak to local agents, which obviously are only marketing a small cohort of properties. Or they're going to go online and they're going to look at Rightmove, Zoopla, really of Rightmove as predominant kind of player you go to. And the big issue there is 75% of the time when you make an inquiry on Rightmove as a student, you'll never hear back after you make that initial inquiry, and that's because you're getting deprioritized against a professional renter. So a really bad experience online. Or the third option is they're going to go to their university and they're going to try and speak to someone at the university to try and point them in the right way. And that's a lot of online forums, and it's messy and it's chaotic. And again, only looking at a small select few properties that the university happens to be marketing.
Right, okay.
If any.
I was going to ask that actually, because obviously first year of uni is usually nice and simple. You go to halls, and then it's obviously second and third years when the scramble starts to try and find properties. Do universities not get involved with that situation and find private landlords who are willing to rent to students?
So when you look at a city, for example, like Bristol, you have two large universities where they have over 30,000 students. This is really reflected across every regional and major city in the UK. And then you'll have smaller universities. The large universities where they have more students will have a halls of residence, but actually halls of residence really only caters for about 3/4 of first years. So you still have the first years that are left to their own devices. And the small universities don't have any halls of accommodation, so you're on your own even from first year. And if you think about the pastoral care system and the financial pressure that universities are under, it's a huge kind of feat to have to cater for even that many first years, let alone trying to think about second and third year students. Some universities will have their own kind of student union that has a team that tries to match and help aggregate some private landlords to offer students, but it's always a very small market share. So it's never enough properties to find the right match for you and your unique preferences as a student renter.
Okay, so going back to the founding of it, so you shelled out a load of donuts to free students, you've got a load of consumer feedback effectively. Now you're armed with qualification that your idea has some interest from the market, but you haven't been studying necessarily how to build a scalable national platform, right? So what did you do next, armed with the information you had?
So the kind of journey of speaking to students was only reconfirming what I already knew, because I'd lived and breathed the pain points of a student, of being the student renter who doesn't know where to go, doesn't know who to trust, feels like they're going to get exploited at every kind of step of the journey. Whereas I didn't understand at all the supply dynamics. I didn't understand we're a marketplace. We have the demand side and the supply side being landlords and agents. I had no idea what their pain points were. So I proceeded to kind of create a very basic business plan of what I thought were their pain points and what we could, do to solve those issues. And I cold called every landlord that I could find online, mostly via my friends' networks of who we'd rented via at our time at university in Bristol, and every other kind of number I could find on Spare Room and Gumtree. And every time I pitched, they would tell me why that was the worst idea that they had ever heard. And, I might have a little bit of a cry, and then I'd kind of write up my rebuttal, and then I'd kind of redo my pitch, and I'd go again and again and again until I ended up winning our first kind of 10, it was really all of our clients, but our first kind of 5 landlords came on board via that method. And then suddenly I had supply.
Not to interrupt, but what was it that they felt didn't work and that you were proposing different to how they had previously?
Well, the proposition was constantly changing based on feedback. It was, I can't even remember what the original pitch was, but it was just constantly, here's my assumptions on the market that I know very little about. And then you just be getting direct feedback. And then you customize the pitch based on what you heard from that feedback. And then you go again and again and again until it landed, until the message was clear. And you'd heard from the previous 5 landlords around what they really thought their pain points were. So it was a really interesting process. And also it lines you up for having to, your job really as a founder, if you're not a technical founder, is sales on both sides, selling your story, selling the business. So it was a horrible experience, and I still have to do cold calls, and I still really don't like the process, but it's a really important one.
So phase 1 objective is to centralize all of the landlords who are currently open or are renting to students. Is there like a phase 2 that's to sort of educate and entice those who have properties on the market for rent to open sort of their mind to renting to students?
So we very much focused on the minimal. It's a great concept called a minimal viable user, which is the users that really need your product and what you're offering. So that was to start with was private landlords managing 1 or 3, 5 properties that were already renting to students. So we didn't need to educate them at the same time as pitching. And then it was tapping into that network, building up the brand with them, and then slowly kind of always evolving that business model and going after the kind of slightly bigger players.
Right. So generally speaking, there are enough properties for students to get into. It's just the process of them getting into it is very difficult for both them and the landlord.
That's a complex question. If we're looking across the UK, we very much have an affordability issue. It depends on the city. If you have a housing shortage across the UK, you could very much say you have an affordability issue. Often there are enough houses. Are there enough affordable houses? My job at the beginning, in the early days, was there are houses available to students across Bristol, but students don't know where to find them and they don't know how to compare them. So let's aggregate as many properties as possible in one place, so that as a student you can come on and you can try and find something that fits your budget, the number of rooms you want, the amenities, the design, to give students a choice. And then you're really matchmaking based on the unique preferences of the renters, but also what is the landlord's referencing criteria. Are the group a good match for the landlord? Because you don't want to waste either party's time.
Yeah, I like that. Do you want to go back to more of the founding story before we dive into the actual way it works?
I think, if we touch then on, so you had your first, you got to having 10, you've got your first 10 landlords, which must have been a bit of a milestone moment. Were you still on your own at that time?
So a really important part of the early journey was, as soon as we won, I was still working with my flatmate a bit at the time. So he was studying to be a doctor, and he would work kind of a few hours on the weekends. And that was really important for momentum for me as well, because it's really scary going out and cold calling and trying to build a Squarespace website and trying to, using Facebook groups to be able to match the supply we had with students. Facebook groups is how we grew the demand side. So cold calling for supply, Facebook groups for demand. And so having him there at the beginning was really important. It was kind of like the stabilizers before I really went off and grew the team. But what was really an important part of the journey, and has always been since the day one, is pitching competitions. So as soon as I started the business, I did some research and found a competition called the New Enterprise Competition run by the University of Bristol Enterprise. And it was a grant up for grant funding. So I had to write a business plan. I was pitching in front of judges, and we won £5,000. And that was kind of fueled the kind of initial growth of the business. And I went on to do that several times. And it was always such an important process to go through, because you're getting live feedback on your business model. You're getting, again, torn to shreds. So you're always kind of improving the business model. You're growing your brand presence, so people know about you. And it also is the perfect learning environment before you go on to try and raise capital.
Yeah, and the money that you received from that competition, did that come with strings attached, or was that just, which is actually quite unique really, because otherwise as a small business, when you receive funds, typically they come with strings attached.
Exactly.
Would you recommend other students who are looking at starting their own business take part in those kind of programs?
It's a kind of non-negotiable. I think you have to do it. If you are terrified by the idea, even better. It's so important in your own kind of learning trajectory, your career trajectory, and it can only improve. It can only help you, because it's business feedback, it's access to capital, it's access to support and mentorship, and brand exposure.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
There's so many competitions out there, so get Googling.
There are, but not all of them have the £5,000. Which is something we've kind of remarked on. So we go to university programs. We were at the Kingston one the other day.
Yeah, and it was almost such a limited amount of money. It's hardly inspiring.
Really?
It was £100.
It's like you couldn't do anything with that.
No. There was we won a Montague Evans prize of £10,000 and a Prince Trust Award of was it 15 or 20,000 pounds? So
Wow.
really substantial money when you're starting a business.
Yes.
It helps, pay for yourself and then hire your first employee.
Yes.
And that's really what we did.
And if you could talk about hiring your first employee, because people overlook hiring, and hiring is like the hardest thing, one of at least. How was that experience for you?
Really, really hard. And still is really hard. And I think I'm only just realizing, 4 years later, how much I've overlooked the importance of hiring and culture and getting the right people in and really investing in that. I think you've got so many things going on. You're trying to build demand, grow supply, build a platform, trying to work out how you're going to grow revenue to survive. The team always is really deprioritized, and that's so the wrong approach. And I would do things very differently next time. But having said that, the first hire we found via a platform called Work and Startups. And he's actually still with us today. So he was a great hire. And
shout out.
A shout out to Tigran. He joined on a commercial manager, whatever that role means. I don't quite know. He basically just did everything. No, he didn't know. And he's now in product. So
cool.
I think there's so many different platforms out there you can use to really kind of try. You don't have a network when you're starting a business out of university. So it's really hard to know who to hire. And I very much didn't want to hire friends, which I think is a good... I'm glad I didn't. I know there's been a lot of founders I know that got seriously burnt by trying to start businesses with friends and not having the same work ethic.
Yeah, maybe that's why we keep failing.
Yeah.
No, we're all right.
Don't jinx it.
So 5 years later, you mentioned the word culture, and obviously maybe 5 years ago when you started, it's quite hard to identify what your culture is. But now 5 years later, with a team growing, if you were to start making hires tomorrow, what would you define your culture as?
So to make sure I've answered the question, you mean back now then?
Yeah, so just because, when you ask someone from day dot, because we're talking about the foundation of Hybr, you kind of don't really know which way's up. Everything is unfolding as it is. And so we're now 5 years down the line, you've grown a team. What would you define Hybr's company culture as now?
To define our company culture.
What makes a good fit for your team?
It's a balance between so I think a more interesting way for me to answer this question rather than me, I could list out our values, but I think it often is so many kind of like buzzwords without being meaningful. I think where I went wrong in the early days was by looking at CV. So when I first started, I thought I'm not going to look at education. I'm just going to look at CV and expertise, domain expertise. And I went wrong there because I wasn't thinking enough about culture in terms of who you are, your values, what do you stand for. And so I think it's very much a balance between someone just being very smart, like really switched on and smart, but it's so much about, like, that's really important. You need that base because then they can learn anything. But then most importantly, you need to have that really go-getter attitude. You need to be really proactive. And you need to generally give a shit around what you're doing and why you're there. So the questions are now always about what motivates you. And if someone says like generally they're there for equity because they want a big payout, I'd rather hear that because it's honest. And at least then you know that you're aligned, that they care about, they're there for the mission, but they're there for financial freedom for their family. You just want someone to be really honest with their intentions and generally want to be part of the team, as well as just being a super kind of smart and switched on, so they have ability to kind of pick things up and be able to run with it, especially in the early days. That's so much more important than kind of specific domain expertise or trying to hire too many kind of consultant type people who are great at setting strategic direction, but they're not executors. And in the early days, in the first probably like 10 years, you need people that do and get their hands dirty. You can't just have managers.
And would you say that everyone who's worked at Hybr has experienced the same pain point that you did as a student? Do they understand the pain?
Not necessarily, no. I think that they empathize with the pain. I think our customer success team are often students or former students, so that's really important. If they're going to be on the phone to students, what better than someone that has just lived through that? But the rest of the team they've bought into the gap in the market. They've bought into wanting to build a problem for an underserved, neglected user base. And that's why they're here. So they really buy into the mission, but they don't necessarily have to have lived through exactly the same experience.
Yeah, I agree with that personally. I think sometimes you cut your nose to spite your own face.
Yeah.
If, you're rejecting good talent because you haven't had the same life experiences as you.
Again, I'd rather someone just be really upfront with why and honest about whatever their reason is and why they want to join the company. And that's fine if they're actually just here for the startup, early stage startup to scale up to wanting to be a unicorn. I love that ambition.
Yeah.
If that could be the sole reason, that's great.
Could we talk a little bit about now the investment? Because you gave us such an interesting perspective on the grants that you managed to win from the universities during those programs. That money came to you condition free and you were able to use it to escalate your growth from the first stage to the second stage, let's call it. And now, to all intents and purposes, it seems from the outside that you've done these large investment rounds to push Hybr to the next stage. But how does the experience compare of raising investment to taking part in those early day university programs?
It's such a good kind of building blocks, because raising money is, especially for pre-seed and kind of seed stage, is all around storytelling. So ability to tell a story in a really articulate and captivating way that fits your audience. So tailoring it to whoever you're speaking to and which side. Then maybe they're probably going to be a parent, so they're probably going to be worried about their kids and what the experience that their kids are going to go through at university. So the storytelling is the most important kind of lesson that I had from the early grant days, as well as be able to take on feedback and be able to directly respond to that feedback. When I was a student and kind of my year off, I was also part of an organisation called Debate Mates. Definitely going to do a shout out to Debate Mates. And what the Debate Mate teaches you is you learn how to be a debating coach, and then you go to different schools and you teach kids how to debate. Especially in state schools, when you don't get the same kind of advantages as private schools in terms of extracurricular activity. And that was such an important kind of training around, how do you directly respond to each point in a concise manner that gets your point across. And what a better way to learn via debating, via kind of grant pitches.
Yes.
And then that kind of sets you up to raise money.
And it teaches you, of course, to listen, which is just so key. And I think you're doing two things really well. You're listening to the consumer, which is great. But of course, that's only half the journey. Then you have to actually utilize what you learn in the product you're building. And you have to be, I think that's really the true definition of agile, is like respond to what your market wants. Okay, so the experience is similar of raising investment, but presumably the money comes with far more complicated conditions because it's a much larger amount of money. And I'm interested in two things. Are you happy it's over? Are you looking forward to the next one? And the second thing is, how did you decide how much money you needed to raise?
So the art of raising kind of capital in the UK could do many podcasts on, and I'm definitely not the right person to speak to about that, but I'll say from my own personal experience. It is, you're kind of working out exactly, this is where your business is, this is where the next milestone that you want to reach, how are you going to get there? In terms of who do you need from a team perspective? Are you going to need to build any new technology to get there, to kind of make your product more scalable? Are you going to need to grow in terms from a marketing expenditure or sales cost, depending on how you reach your target users? And then working out how much revenue you're generating, how much kind of capital you need in order to get to that next milestone. And that next milestone will be a kind of revenue milestone or a growth milestone, depending on the business. And then it's working backwards. Okay, this is how much money that we need. It's always better to go out and try and raise the minimum amount you need, because then if you can raise over that, then that looks much better than trying to raise a huge amount and you're only at 20% complete. You're going to really struggle to raise the rest of the money. So that's the kind of the logic that you follow.
Right. I mean, it's so exciting because, you know, I think back to when I was 19 at university, I had a big dream to start a boat cleaning business called Botox, give your boat a facelift. I still think to this day it's genius, right? But it's when you're trying to understand if you have any competence or a chance in the marketplace at that age, you are able to take part in those competitions, and it's, you know, your time frame between taking part in both contexts is so short that I think it will really help people to see the possibility. Like, let's say, for example, they win one of those competitions, that actually is not, that is substantial towards saying you have this talent and this ability and you've learned this skill and now you can replicate it on a larger and larger scale.
Yeah.
Actually receiving the funds, are you happy to talk about how much the most recent round was, an actual figure?
Yep, so we raised 3.3 million.
Whoa, it's a lot of money. Does it all come at once, and what are the kind of conditions that it does come with? So
typically, unless you're kind of a SaaS product or a kind of, you know, an AI startup, you're normally raising on a kind of rolling basis. So you start your fundraise and you just start getting cash in. So you raise on a convertible note. So you have 6 months to close the round. And then that gives you more time to kind of meet investors. The best way to raise a round is actually lining up all your investors beforehand, pretty much predefining the valuation, the amount you're going to raise, who's going to lead, opening the round, and then trying to close it within a month, because that's a much kind of more sophisticated way to do it if you manage to. But actually be able to have that network is again really impossible when you're new and you're first time founder. So every time in the last 2 raises that I've gone out to raise, it's been sales calls, it's been cold outreach, it's been LinkedIn.
Wow.
So I've learned a huge amount what to do for the next round for sure. But the annoying point is you're getting money in whilst you're building, whilst you're trying to complete the raise. So you're trying to grow, you're spending all of your time pitching. I was doing like 5 pitches a day. And you're trying to grow a team and you're trying to hit milestones. So it's not easy for sure.
It's a grueling process.
Yeah.
We hear that a lot, don't we?
Yeah, too often, sadly.
Yeah, no one really enjoys it. Well, they do enjoy it, but not really. You know, it's a little bit white knuckle, right?
I've got questions about the product, how it works, and then about the benefits of it in reality. Obviously, I was a student. I had the same struggle that you did, although I had it in my first year. I forgot to apply for halls and then was in a bun fight in the summer to try and find somewhere to live in September, and got the deal done actually playing Call of Duty. Just met some guy on Facebook in a Facebook group, and then he was like, "Do you want to play Call of Duty?" I was like, "Absolutely," and we chatted, and there I did. I had a house, but we massively overpaid for it, and you've already mentioned affordability being a huge issue. So how does Hybr help students with the affordability issue with renting?
So firstly, in terms of what we do, we're a marketplace where we aggregate as many properties as possible across lots of different types of stock. So you have kind of house shares, you have flats, like studios to 3-4 bed apartments, and then you have the more kind of institutionalized purpose-built student accommodation kind of en suites for first years. And we try to have everything, so from a more premium 1 bed to a 15 bed property on the outskirts of a city, so that we have catering for every type of budget and preference. That's kind of part of our mission to revolutionize the student rental experience. We need to make sure that the assortment is there, and then as a student you can come on, you can easily search, because we know that as a student the first inquiry you make is always the wrong inquiry. Students are panic renting, so they're in a rush they don't really read the rent, the location, the number of rooms. They're just, how many properties can I apply for, because I think my chance of success is so low.
Right.
So we capture the data on that first inquiry and then redirect them to more appropriate properties that they're actually going to pass the referencing checks for.
Yeah.
And then we ensure that there's full transparency, so they have a dashboard where they can keep track of all of their inquiries, whether they've been accepted and rejected, and why have they been rejected. Nice. So maybe that pet, snake they wanted to bring to uni wasn't such a good idea. And then their viewings calendar, so they can see all of their viewings, when are their upcoming viewings, how can they coordinate their diary so that everyone in their group can go.
Nice, so they can share between the group, because most people at uni, there is groups of them, aren't there? So
exactly, so like group search, group view, or as an individual. And then it's tracking all of your offers in one place and collecting all the key documentation that you need from you and your group, so that as soon as you you go to a viewing that you like, you put the offer on the table with all the data that the landlord needs to accept you guys, and then you're through, easy signing contracts online, pass referencing, and the process is done. So it's digitalizing it, automating it, making it kind of really seamless rather than the kind of sporadic paperwork experience that we all went through.
Nice, yeah.
So that's kind of framing like Hybr, that's the kind of offering for students. And from an affordability perspective, I'm really passionate about, being a bit of a voice for the under 30s rental market in the sector. And I think there's an opportunity for that, because there hasn't really been someone that's kind of fighting the corner of students. So it's important for us to show the data that we have around, this is what students can afford, and this is the supply that's available on the market. Here's the disconnect. Yeah. Here's the opportunity for investors and developers to try and make that work, because that will be such a popular assortment if you can build within that price point. So then it's just really pushing the market using data to say, this is the type of supply we need. And in a lot of cities, it's actually not a housing shortage. There is plenty, sometimes too many rooms, but they'll still be empty because people can't afford them. You can't keep on pushing people's budgets. You're not going to find another kind of £500 under the sofa. Yeah. People have budgets.
So I have another question came to my head out of that answer. Have you had any property developers approach you who are building? It's sort of in the off-plan saying, we're going to have this many student houses finished by this date. Can you advertise them now? Do you get any of that?
Definitely.
That's very cool. And so something else I wanted to touch on then is you can look at it from the student perspective on affordability, and then you touched on it, I think, to do with sort of trying to educate the market by being a mouthpiece for it and being a voice in that space. Are you carrying out checks on the landlords? So if a landlord brings a property to market, it's wildly overvalued in what he's asking for, would you say to them, actually, this isn't okay, and we're not going to put this on Hybr?
So our sales team have targets where there's like a limit price point. So we target them on bringing under a certain price point to ensure that the marketplace doesn't become a premium marketplace. But we don't like to say, we vet landlords in terms of making sure they're compliant and they're legally who they say they are. Yeah. But we don't like to we can't assume what our renters will want. We'd rather have it all on the platform. And if it gets rented, then if someone wants it. If it doesn't get rented, then it's not popular. And we can then give landlords the data to say, here's the average rents in this area. Your property is this much over the average rent. Sure. Yes, you've got a swimming pool and a cinema room. Potentially, you could still reduce it by 5%. So again, using data to drive actionable insights to try and help them let their properties. Okay, and so can we just touch on the revenue model for Hybr? Yeah. How is it that you actually generate revenue from matchmaking students with landlords? So we're entirely free for students and graduates. And we work with landlords and agents. So agents is someone that's managing on behalf of private landlords, on behalf of third party. And we have a commission model, so it's upfront free marketing exposure, and they only pay on successful booking. So they win when they win. Mm-hmm. And then it means that we're always optimizing the platform for the conversion rate of the student inquiry becoming a booker, because we want the student to find the right match, and we want the landlord to find the right match. It's kind of nice that everyone's aligned. But we've just also launched a kind of SaaS product. So we're kind of now a SaaS-enabled marketplace. And that's just because we wanted to ensure that we were providing enough value to ensure that the supply on our platform was available and active, and we were bringing on the best supply for our student renters. So we brought a new product to market where agents and landlords can pay a subscription to access the software. Okay.
It's a very well thought out product, you know, very interesting indeed. Is it tag?
Yeah, you correct.
Yeah, I understand the product, and I think you do a great job on the website of talking about what you do. So the messaging is clear on the brand. I'm interested to know, if I could, what do you think of the experience of being a founder now that you're well and truly on your way to building a big business? How does it feel to be a founder?
Being a founder is, I think just the best metaphor that, again, everyone talks about is you're building a plane whilst flying the plane. And that's what being a founder is.
Yeah.
Maybe the plane's also half on fire. So you're also trying to put the fire out.
But would you recommend to other people to become a founder?
It's definitely not for everyone. It's really not for everyone. You put yourself under a huge amount of stress. And it's really difficult to balance kind of work-life balance. It's difficult to do, to get right, especially in the early days. And it's a lot of like financial uncertainty. So I think it's really important to kind of go with the eyes wide open, because you need to be so committed because of those three things.
Yes.
But it's also, I feel very fortunate, very privileged, because starting a business when you're 21 years old is so much easier than starting a business when you've got a mortgage and a family and responsibilities. So I'm very lucky that I have such an easy landing ground. You know, when I'm building it, if anything goes wrong, and it's only an incredible learning trajectory where you're just learning so much every day, and that has just huge benefits to you personally, as well as trying to have like a real impact on a sector. And you have to just be so passionate about what you're doing, what you're building, and it's always constantly evolving, but it has to always excite you. And that's what I'm very lucky about, is I wake up every day and I kind of run to the office, not only because I've like so much to do, but mostly also because I love it, and I'm really passionate about building this solution, and I think the market really needs.
Are there any aspects of being a founder that you unexpectedly love?
Such a good question. Unexpectedly love. I really went in so naive. I don't think I was really expecting anything. I didn't know what to expect. I think, product. I didn't know anything about building tech teams. I didn't know anything about tech and product. And I absolutely loved the exposure to the UK like startup tech scene, the people that you get to meet, and the exposure I get to really smart people. But also I love geeking out over like user journeys and learning more around how to build great products.
I think that helps because you can still, I imagine, tap into what it would have been like if you could have used Hybr when you were a student.
Definitely.
And I think that really helps you with trying to understand the journey.
Definitely.
What does success mean to you?
Success means to me, success means that Hybr, when you go on to Hybr as a young renter, that you feel supported, that you find a property that works for you, and that you come away and think, wow, that was a really positive experience. We're 100% not there yet, because we are not across the UK and catering to every student. But when that happens, that's success.
I think there's a lot of symmetry between renting as a student and renting for the first time in a big city. It's just as much of a bloodbath, renting in London at 24 as it is renting in Bristol at 19.
Yeah.
Can Hybr accommodate for those people? Will you accommodate for those people?
Definitely. We already see kind of 30% of our inquiries are from graduates that were students and have just graduated and staying on or moving to London, Manchester, Leeds. So we're already catering for that kind of user group. And we're kind of, the way we like to view it is we kind of capture that first year as they flee the kind of mother's nest, and we kind of hold their hand, that trusted friend, and then kind of our brand grows up with those renters.
So does Hybr's success exist by maintaining a niche? You know, so for example, if I go on Hybr today, it's not suitable for me, I assume, and so therefore Hybr has to maintain its core demographic.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and one we haven't really defined yet. Our niche is so important because having that, it really roots us in being able to target a certain customer, and from both the supply and the demand side, and that niche which is the part that's most underserved within the rental market. But because we're already finding that the students that graduate, you know, they still need that same support from us and come back to us, we'll probably end up having a kind of Hybr students, Hybr young professional with a different user journey.
Yeah.
And we're already building that in at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Also, if you could do a Hybr pet would be great for the guy with the snake, because it can be quite hard renting when you've got a pet.
Well, the new renters bill.
I know. But
you have to have pets. You have to accept pets.
But when is that coming into force? Because I heard that law change last year, I think, but it's not actually effective yet, is it?
It's meant to come in around like end of summer next year, but let's see.
You'll have people self-identifying as pets, so they get half price rent.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
I mean, I do, but they go down a much larger rabbit hole. I'm just conscious of time.
Me too. I'd always like to ask one question, which is, you've shouted out a few people, the debate. What was the debate thing?
Debate Mate.
Debate Mate. And that's a national course, is it, that anyone can participate in?
Yeah.
And do you begin as a debater, not as a coach, or do you start as a coach?
So if you are a school student in a state school, you can request Debate Mate to come and teach at your school. If you are a university student, then you apply to become a debate coach, and then they'll teach you how to be it's already called a mentor. So you're taught how to be a mentor.
Cool.
And then you go into state schools.
So alongside that shout out, I'm always curious to know what your kind of favourite tools are that you might use day to day at Hybr, things that you might shout out as being particularly useful for you and your team, your favourite products, that kind of thing.
So Slack. We use Slack. I use Slack more than WhatsApp. Notion. Notion is our kind of single source of truth for any kind of history of a project, any documentation that you need. We write up playbooks for everything, all on Notion. And Linear and Figma from a kind of tech product perspective. We've dabbled in a bit of Asana from more of a kind of deep dive into kind of project management. And I'd say those are the core ones, most valuable.
Have you noticed that what with the SaaS products that are available to us now, like Notion and all the ones you mentioned, Slack too, a company can actually have the tools that it needs available for the day-to-day runnings of the business for actually quite a low barrier to entry. And people now more than ever are able to start a business if they have an idea or have experienced a pain point. I'm just curious to know what you think the next 10 years looks like from a kind of entrepreneurial perspective, whether you think there's going to be a growth in small micro businesses, let's call them, using these kind of same tech stacks that are being used by the bigger companies, or something different.
I think it's amazing, or kind of, what's the best word for it? Democratizing access.
Yes.
For lots of younger smaller businesses. I think we're really lucky in the UK of how easy it is to start a business, and the SEIS and EIS is so important because it's the best way to be able to raise funds, and most businesses would not be able to without it. 100% and never be able to raise the rounds we've raised without that. That tax relief scheme. So yeah, I think it's we should be seeing a big increase, and we have seen over the last kind of 10 years of new entrants entering the market, and just need to encourage more women to be doing it. Because I think there's a lot of conversation around how only 2% of VC funding goes towards women, and you're looking for gaps in the market. There are probably a lot of products out there that could kind of cater to a more female audience and build really strong brands.
Yes.
So I think that's the part that we need to be encouraging.
How do we do that? How do we get that 2% up to something more like 10 or 20? How do we do that?
Education. I think education, specific female schemes at university to kind of encourage women studying business, entrepreneurship, innovation, engineers, and you're working in product, targeting women in those schemes to kind of show them entrepreneurial competitions, introduce them to that space, helping kind of build up their confidence, and also doing it even earlier from like a school perspective as well.
Have you thought about maybe going and speaking? Because I think you'd be fantastic. I would feel motivated by you. So if I was 18 years old at university studying business and you came along and, because I think particularly because Hybr has such an affinity to students, because you're literally building a platform for them to make their lives better. So you're one of them. I think it'd be an interesting opportunity for you, maybe somewhere down the line.
It's kind of why I do things like this.
Yeah.
Like once a month, I'll put some time towards going to speak at. We've done some workshops, like first-time mentor workshops at schools, talks at universities, podcasts, anything to try and share the story in more detail. And again, like democratizing access to that. To give kind of tangible steps of what worked for me so that anyone else can try and do the same thing. Because it's all about making it feel like it's possible. Yeah. One thing I didn't mention is that my sister-in-law had just started a business before I started a business. So that, again, from the subconscious perspective, would have showed me that it's possible. And then my brother started a business just after me. Okay, so, you just need to believe that it's possible. Yes. And then it's something that there isn't this kind of, the ladder hasn't been removed, that you can do that. That route is accessible to you.
Yes, absolutely. The last question from me is a slightly different topic, which is the topic of job security, but irrespective of gender. Lots of people talk about AI at the moment, taking our jobs, taking everybody's jobs. And I'd like to ask business owners like yourself, why haven't you fired everyone and now just use AI instead of a team of people?
Because I'd still have to manage that AI and it would be a complete nightmare. It's also just not possible for lots of different reasons. But firstly, I think the way we should be viewing, because AI is we're just going to be calling out technology within a couple of months. Like it's just technology. Everyone uses AI nowadays. Yep. And the reason why tech doesn't replace humans is about making humans more efficient so that you can repurpose your team, so that you don't have people doing manual, inefficient tasks. Instead, they can be repurposed to focus on high value tasks, which only they could do. That involves creativity, involves strategic thinking, involves a personal touch, relationship building. So it's around how can you rethink the roles within your company and make sure that anything that could be done by tech is done by tech, and that anything that requires out-of-the-box thinking has people in it. Yeah,
and I asked the question, of course, a little bit tongue-in-cheek because it's obvious as to why you haven't, but there are so many articles floating around at the moment
I think it's a good question.
that propose the idea that it's going to replace us all. And if you walk around an office like yours, you see that every team is full of people, and people are looking for more people, not for AI. I completely agree with you. Okay, well, Hannah, thank you for today. It's been really nice talking to you, and it's been incredibly inspiring, actually, even for us who sit through these. We sit through these conversations
we suffer
hour after hour. We suffer them. Really great job, and you don't strike me as someone necessarily who sort of spends that much time sitting around sort of patting yourself on the back for the accomplishments you've made. It looks to me like you're a bit mission driven, and you still haven't landed your spacecraft on the planet you're going to. No. But awesome job so far, and it's going to be great fun to watch you continue to grow.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Wicked.